how do tank crews go to the bathroom? Normally, tank crews go out to do their business outside the tank as long as there is no danger. But although it is rare nowadays, it used to be normal for tank crews to spend hours or even, in extreme cases, 1 or 2 whole days inside a tank, unable to leave it because they were in the middle of a battlefield. Leaving the tank in areas where there could be enemies just to urinate or what follows is something a tank crew member is not willing to do. Generally, when they are in combat, tankers tend to hold on as long as they can, but in operations that are too long, sooner or later they will have to go to the bathroom. And although it may seem obvious tanks have never had toilets, there are many testimonies from tankers about this. That's why we know the improvised procedures they used to answer the call of nature when they couldn't go outside. Throughout history, the improvised methodologies for crews to be able to relieve themselves inside tanks have varied greatly. For example, in World War II, the Allied M4 Sherman tanks had an emergency hatch at the bottom of the tank, right under the gunner's seat. It was very useful for getting out when enemies were on top of the tank or when it flipped over. This hatch is very safe, as it could only be opened from the inside and it was not at all complicated. When the Sherman crews were in uncertain territories, they used this hatch as a toilet. In this way, they could go to the bathroom without exposing themselves to possible snipers or enemy soldiers. This was not very common, as it was rare for the Sherman crews to have to spend prolonged periods in dangerous areas. However, it was something that did tend to occur in Vietnam. The tank in service was the M48 and the M60 Patton. The M48 had been in service since 1953, and the M60 had been in service since the 60s. Although only the M48 Patton was used in Vietnam because there weren't enough M60s to send them into combat. Definitely, the Vietnamese jungles were a really dangerous and uncertain place where you really didn't want to be. You never knew where the enemy would come out from or if there was a trap. Tanks weren't always in the jungles, but it was common to be in territories where you definitely shouldn't leave the tank. When the tanks were in uncertain territories, what they would do is use the casings of the remaining ammunition. These were large and had great capacity. When firing the tank, they always got a casing, and there was a slot to get rid of these so they could do their necessities inside the tank and dispose of the waste in a partially hygienic and very fast way. This was a bit uncomfortable as the holes in the casings were quite small, but the crews did it. The M60 and M48 Patton, like the Shermans, had emergency hatches, but in this case, under the driver's seat. Although I couldn't find records of the crews using them like the Shermans, we also see this in Soviet tanks like the M72 SE. According to some sources I read, it is said that they also used the bags that covered the ammunition to prevent them from rusting, since they were also quite large and robust. By the 80s, unfortunately, for the crews of the M1 Abrams, things were more difficult. In the Middle East conflicts, the operations were quite long. To avoid using diapers, the crews used the wrappers of combat rations and water bottles to urinate. The ration packs were quite airtight, and once sealed, when there was an opportunity, they were thrown out of the hatch. All of this because the Abrams did not have a lower emergency hatch. Usually for operations that are too long, many vehicle crews, normally air vehicle crews, are urged to wear adult diapers. This is very common for astronauts who have to wear diapers for re-entry operations, as they usually take hours. However, tank crews obviously want to avoid wearing diapers. Obviously, all these procedures improvised by the crews are nothing more than anecdotal. Situations where the tank crew had to figure out how to solve a problem. But they are still a testament to how cunning we can be in desperate times. There are modern tanks that provide very good amenities in this regard. For example, the Mercado Mark IV can even have an optional bathroom module for counterinsurgency missions.